welcome to the Spirit Guides and Enjoy Holistic podcast with your host, Mark Chatterton. I'm pleased to be able to welcome back onto the show today astrologer Helen Sewell, who is going to be answering my questions mainly about the Covid-19 virus, as well as a few other things. I first interviewed Helen 8 years ago in 2012, and we discussed the year 2012 and its significance back then, as it was such an important year. At the moment, it looks like the year 2020 is also going to be a significant year. So a warm welcome to you, Helen.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you. And it's really great to be here and to be able to talk about the astrology of what's going on. Now, you were talking about 2012 and has anything happened? Well, I would say personally, if people don't think there's been changes in the last 8 years, then I think there's been huge changes. And basically, what the signature for the year 2012 was the square between the planets Uranus and Pluto. Now, the outer planets have huge archetypal meaning, and they're the ones that create big changes in the world. So when you've got two big planets, when they come into aspect, they create change. And if I give you a little bit of info on the meanings of these planets. So first of all, they came into conjunction in the mid-60s. So that was the start of the cycle. And then when Uranus moves faster than Pluto, so then it comes to what's called the square aspect. And this happened in 2012, and so there was a lot of excitement in the astrological community about this. And basically, if you look at Uranus, so Uranus is the planet to do with sudden change. It's associated with revolution, and it's almost like it erupts out of the collective unconscious, if you like, and it wants to create a more idealistic vision of the future. And basically it wants to create a better world. Now, Pluto rules Scorpio, and he's known as the Dark Lord of the underworld, and is basically associated with power and control, and the base chakra, libidinal energy, if you like. So when you've got the combination of Uranus, which also represents freedom, then it's like those energies combine, and you create big changes. Uranus rules the sign of Aquarius, and I also think that 2012 was, even though it takes about 100 years for the overlap from the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius, then 2012 was quite a pivotal time, I would say, and a real turning point. And all things that Aquarius rules and is associated with have come into sharp focus since that time. Now, if you think of the zodiac signs, they're all either masculine or feminine, but Aquarius is kind of regarded as gender neutral, actually. And if you think about all the changes in the last 8 years, like the Me Too movement, minority groups making a demand for their needs to be recognized, trans people who want their own toilets, for instance, and a lot of people that don't even identify with either gender. And this has really come into focus over the last 8 years. Uranus rules Aquarius, and it's almost like it wants a society that's fairer, equal, tolerant of all people. And one of the upsides, of course, of the age of Aquarius is that it may well be a more peaceful time, because a lot of people have predicted 2,000 years of peace. And I think where they're coming from is because the air signs are what make us most human. They're the signs which are more rational, detached, and so therefore deal with emotional problems and issues that come up in a more rational way. Whereas coming out of the age of Pisces, which is a water sign, we've tended to react to things in a much, coming from a sort of a gut wrenching perspective, and react quite strongly. So I think that's where they're coming from. And Aquarius rules things like new technology, and there's been incredible leaps forward in the last eight years with new technology. Think of all the industries and services that are now automated, and the development of robots and that kind of thing. And think of Aquarius being a light, airy sign to do with the mind, communication. Then for our homes, for instance, out have all the sentimental Piscean knickknacks, and all the things with emotional value, if you like, and income, minimalism, nice, clean, bright, airy spaces. That's also really coming into being, if you like. Aquarius rules new technology and electricity, funnily enough, because that's the Uranian side of it. And think of electric cars, for instance. That will be very, very much in keeping with the last 8 years. And when Uranus was discovered, when the 3 outer planets were discovered, if you just look what was coming into the collective, then it gives us big clues about the nature of the planet. And Uranus was discovered in 1781, and there was so much revolution happening. And the catchphrase, we just had the American Revolution and the French Revolution's coming up, and the catchphrase of the French Revolution, of course, liberté, equalité, fraternité, sums up Uranus really well. It wants change. It's trying to create this new society. So yeah, that's why I think an enormous amount of change has happened since
Right.
2012.
So,
and will
okay.
continue to do so.
Yeah, let's move on to 2020, and obviously this year, and it's quite an extraordinary year, what's been going on with the coronavirus pandemic. Many people say, I didn't see that coming. What about astrologers? Did they see that coming then? And
Well,
what's their reaction to it?
Yeah, I mean, and personally, I'm much more of a psychological astrologer, but certainly the French astrologer André Barbault, sadly he's died since, but he wrote an essay in 2011, and he uses quite an interesting technique of forecasting called cyclic index. And apparently it's proved to be very accurate. And in this essay, and I'll just read one sentence from this. So this was written in 2011, and he says, it may well be that we're seriously threatened by a new pandemic in 2020-21, a period which is at the lowest point in the cyclic index for the whole of the 21st century. So, you know, that was pretty spot on, wasn't it? You know, it's incredible, really. And last year, a lot of astrologers were getting quite excited about 2020 because the 2 heavyweights of the solar system, Saturn, which rules things like restriction and lack and hardship, was in a conjunction with Pluto in January. So I remember I was speaking at a conference in Ireland in the autumn, and people were saying, oh, you know, what do you think then about next year? And I said, well, you know, it just doesn't look good. Here we have these two planets, which, you know, they're not light at all. They're really heavy. So I said things I think are going to get pretty tough. And of course, the audience didn't want to hear this at all, because they said, hang on a minute, you know, things are bad enough already. But, you know, it's many astrologers were looking at that. Perhaps not saying exactly what was going to happen, but you can certainly get the energy of these two planets and what they represent. So, and interestingly, Jupiter also joined Saturn and Pluto over the months of 2020. And the conjunction of Jupiter and Pluto was apparent in the Spanish flu pandemic just after the war, in the sign of Cancer. And this year, it's exactly the same conjunction, but in the opposite sign of Capricorn. And because if you think about whatever Jupiter touches, it really expands it and exaggerates the whole principle of the other planet. And of course, Pluto rules death. So that would be very in keeping with the pandemic.
Okay. What about the future? Have you looked into what's going to happen in maybe the next few months, next year or so? Can you give us any indication of how it's all going to pan out, really?
I think things have changed fundamentally. I mean, when Pluto goes through a sign, it changes the meaning of that sign, and we can never go back to how things used to be. So there's definitely going to be changes on a very fundamental level. Now, if you think about Pluto has been for the last 12 years, it's been going through the sign of Capricorn. So what does Capricorn rule? Okay, it rules things like institutions, like the NHS, the police, banking, the establishment, the monarchy, even all the things that the nuts and bolts of society. It rules all these things. And we can see that these topics have all come into focus over the last 12 years. Now, it goes out of Capricorn in 2023 for the next 20 years. So we're going to see major changes in all the things that Aquarius rules. It's a very political sign, actually. So there's probably be big changes in the way government is set up, for instance, or even the way we vote. I think that system now is well overdue for change, actually. Uranus, it moved into the earthy sign of Taurus last year, and it will be in Taurus for the next 7 years. Now, Taurus rules what we value, what we really value. And one thing I've really heard people saying is that they have been totally reevaluating their lives and what's important to them, and thinking about what they truly value. And I think that this is very much in keeping with Uranus. With Uranus, things happen very suddenly, and it can be quite shocking. Which, of course, this lockdown has been like that. It's taken us a bit of time to readjust to it, but you know, that reevaluating what means a lot to us is definitely in focus.
Okay. Obviously, as well as the lockdown and the pandemic this year, the Black Lives Matter movement, protests, especially in America, but also in Britain and other places around the world, that seems to have come to the fore. What can you say about what's going on there, really?
Yeah. Well, all the things that I talked about with Uranus. Uranus wants equality, it wants fairness, it's all part of this Aquarian Uranian image, if you like, of fairness, and that's why it's really, really coming up for change. I mean, we've had race riots in the past for many years, but this time I think it's different. It's exactly the same with the Me Too movement. This time it's different. There's been a lot over the years to do with inequalities, but Aquarius doesn't stand for that. It wants everybody to be equal, and this is what it's all about. The pendulum is really swinging, um, and it feels very different. And I think the changes that are made now are different. They are going to create. It's almost like a big wake up call. It's just, I mean, astrologically, it's just fascinating, absolutely fascinating how it plays out in reality.
And obviously, one big factor in America is the US president, and the fact that at the end of the year we're going to have elections again for maybe the same president, maybe a different president. I guess that many astrologers would have done his chart before when he came president. Is there anything you can say about that and what the future might hold for America?
Yes, yeah. I mean, one thing I do find really fascinating at the moment is that so we've got Donald Trump, Boris Johnson, the Chinese president. They're all Geminis, and Gemini is a dual sign. And if you think about it, there's so much duality going on at the moment. There's so much polarization as well going on at the moment, and that's the way I think the universe works. Really, really does reflect what's going on now. So Donald Trump is a Gemini. Gemini rules communication. He has got his sun conjunct or next to Uranus, and Uranus, that impulsive side of him, that side of him that comes from left field, and if you combine that with that Gemini communication style of tweeting all the time, that's absolutely classic for somebody like him. In terms of the transits that he's got, it's interesting because he's got some good aspects with the planets Jupiter and Pluto, trining a point in his chart to do with him in the world and his career, which is actually very positive because it's powerful, and Jupiter always brings a bit of good luck as well. But he's got Chiron, the wounded healer, in an aspect to his Mercury, which means that there'll be a lot of wounding in communication. Either him wounding people or him being wounded by others. He's also got Saturn opposite his Venus, and when you have that by transit, it doesn't create somebody that's very popular, because Saturn it's like a massive reality check to do with your, if you like, how attractive you are to people and how sociable you are. And even next year, he's then got Pluto opposing his Venus. And it makes me wonder about how his popularity will go. As I say, I'm not a predictive astrologer, but I think it's, that there's every possibility that, well, if he does get in again, that it's not going to be easy. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
That's for sure. It's a bit like with Boris this year. He's got the planet Neptune which creates fogginess, confusion. It's a very tricky planet to deal with in a very difficult aspect to his Mercury. And people have been saying that in meetings he's just been all over the place. He's been not focused at all. And interesting enough, the Mercury rules the lungs. And when I saw this transit, I thought, I think he might get the virus, and he has, because there's a weakness there going on with him. But it is creating this confusion with him. It's not a great time to be in charge. That's for sure.
No,
and
no.
clear, strong communication. If you think what's been coming out of the government, it's just been quite chaotic, actually. And, very difficult.
Right. Before we go, one thing I just wanted to ask you about was, apart from doing astrology, you also are a relationship counsellor. Has the lockdown caused an increase in relationship breakdown, would you say? And have you been involved in still dealing with people in this sense?
Yes, I'm afraid to say it has had quite a dramatic effect, actually. If you think about it, a lot of couples, even though they have a difficult relationship, at least they have, if one of them or both of them are out at work, they get a break. But it's like a pressure cooker situation. So people that have got underlying problems, they really have come to the fore. And unfortunately, I have seen a few couples that have, it's brought them to a point of separation, actually. And also, when for individuals, I also see individuals for counselling as well. There's been a lot more anxiety and like people having panic attacks. And if you're sensitive and believe in like the collective, there's a lot of free-floating anxiety in the collective, and people are just tuning into that and picking up on it, which is very difficult for people, especially if they're sensitive or it brings out a kind of paranoia in them, which is not easy.
No. Right. Well, we'll have to wind it up now. But before I go, Helen does do astrological readings, and you've got a website called astrologicalinsights.co.uk, which you can contact Helen through that and see about some of her work. But it's been fascinating hearing what you've had to say about all that's been going on and the future, etc. And thank you very much, Helen, for the interview.
Thank you, Mark.